Amir.
Pleased to be moderating this afternoon's launch of the Global Human Development Report. Before we start, I would like to tell you that there is a simultaneous translation into English, Albanian, and Serbian. At the bottom end of your screen with interpretation, you can choose English for English, you can choose German for Albanian, and French for Serbian. And if you want to mute the original language, you can press on the mute original audio. So you may want to just do the right setup. Also wanted to say we have the speakers and the panelists are showing on the screen. The rest of you are in the audience, will be muted, but you will have an opportunity to post questions throughout the whole afternoon through the Q&A box. But as an introduction, we will show you a very brief video to get attuned to the theme of the report. So over, Amir, if you could show us the video.
A new frontier in human progress is here, one where people can choose to live in balance with the planet. But no country has achieved this yet. As things stand, human activity is putting immense pressure on the planet, leading to crises like COVID-19, climate change, and mass extinctions. Business as usual is not an option. Transformation is possible, but inequalities stand in the way of solutions. Now is the time for all countries, rich and poor, to redesign their paths to human progress. It is vital to work with and not against nature, to scrap harmful subsidies and incentivize greener regulation, and relearn how to value the natural world, changing our consumption patterns in the process. This is a new planetary era, one where human activities are shaping life on Earth. It is our choice to use our power to restore, rethink, and transform. We are the first generation of the Anthropocene. Let us be the first to choose a legacy of people and planet thriving together.
So again, warm welcome to the launch of the Global Human Development Report 2020 in Kosovo. It's really a great pleasure to be co-hosting this event together with the Swedish Embassy in Kosovo. We're truly really pleased to have Sweden as our long-term strong partner and supporter, who was also launching the global report in December with us. So for 30 years, UNDP has released the Human Development Report and Index, assessing how countries are ranking and progressing in terms of human development, using indicators on health, education, and living standards, a proxy for the freedom and opportunities people have. The 30th anniversary report now introduces a new experimental global index that looks at human development progress in a new light, placing emphasis on both people and the planet. We believe that today's launch in Kosovo is timely, as the formulation of the new National Development Strategy 2030 has just been launched. For the first time, environment will feature as one of the key strategic priorities in the NDS. Kosovo just like the rest of the world, is navigating through the COVID crisis and focused on recovery efforts to get the economy back on track, and to support those people and businesses that have been hurt the most. While this is, of course, critically important, we also see this as a great opportunity for economic transformation, for aiming towards a better balance between the planet and people, and an opportunity to build forward better. Inspired by this global HDR, we're actually now planning to prepare a Kosovo Human Development Report, focusing on COVID recovery, but also on how Kosovo's economy or development can thrive within its environmental boundaries. We hope to have an opportunity to engage with many of you throughout this process. Today's event is very much a kind of a start of this conversation along the lines, the key messages of the Global Human Development Report, and a reflection, opportunity to reflect on what it means for Kosovo and how we can together jointly advance this agenda. But first, so let's move forward with this event. We're really pleased to have 3 distinguished speakers, followed by a great presentation on the key findings of the report. And after that, a panel discussion with 5 panelists, each representing different sectors and disciplines, bringing their views and thoughts on the report. We hope to keep this event as interactive as possible. So if you have questions, please post them on the Q&A chat. You can also use hashtag HDR2020 if you want to share your thoughts in social media. But now, I would like to move forward in introducing our speakers. We're truly honored and grateful to have Mirjana Spoljaric Egger, UN Assistant Secretary General and Regional Director of UNDP's Regional Bureau for Europe and the Commonwealth of Independent States, with us today from New York. She will provide us an overview to some of the key messages and more. But without further ado, the floor is yours, Mirjana.
Thank you very much, Maria, and it's a pleasure to join you from New York. I also want to say good morning, good afternoon to the distinguished speakers, Your Excellencies, and the panelists, and also greet my colleagues on the call. I also want to thank the Embassy of Sweden for co-hosting this, and also for having launched the global, to the Swedish government for having launched the global report, or having conducted the global launch with us on the 2020 HDR. This report not only marks the 30th anniversary edition of the Human Development Report, but it's also a game changer in many ways. We will remember the year 2020 as a year where we as humans were humbled by a tiny little virus, but we also have to acknowledge that scientists have been warning of a pandemic like this for many years, as a reflection of the pressures that humans put on planet Earth. And these human pressures on the planet have grown so exponentially in the past 100 years that we are now bringing the Earth to a brink, so to say, even though we have also achieved incredible progress at the same time. And as the film has said, and as Maria also said in her brief introduction, we are now entering a new geological era, which is the Anthropocene, or the so-called Age of Humans. Now, for the first time in 300,000 years, humans have become the dominant force shaping the future of the planet, instead of the planet shaping us, as used to be the case. And we literally today have the power to alter the atmosphere and the biosphere in which we live. So humans have the power to destroy, but they also have the power to repair. But no species has ever had this kind of might before, and we have to seize the opportunity to turn it into a positive power going forward. Because COVID-19 is a troubling glimpse in what is our new normal, or what it might be in the coming months or years. And we want, as UNDP, to seize this opportunity for choosing a new development pathway together with you. Because the choices we make today, as Maria has said, and as we build forward better, will determine how we will thrive and achieve sustainable development. The 2020 Human Development Report introduces a new planetary pressure adjusted human development index, and my colleague Ben Slay will speak about this later on. In addition to taking into account human development in terms of health, education, and standards of living, this new index suggests to include the impact on the planet by considering carbon dioxide emissions and the material footprint. The numbers, according to this PHDI, as the film showed us, suggest that the progress in human development has not been increasing as fast as we have assessed so far with the traditional Human Development Index, precisely because it has led to increased planetary pressures. Now, this Human Development Report does not provide us with specific recommendations on achieving the sustainable balance between planet and people. It merely suggests 3 broad mechanisms for change. But we must also start by acknowledging that everyone has a role to play. People need to be encouraged and given the opportunities to act. Almost 80% of the global population believes that it is important to protect the planet, but only 50% say that they are likely to take concrete action to save it. The results of the recent People's Climate Vote conducted by Oxford University and UNDP, and it was the biggest ever climate survey conducted, speak to themselves. Even though the survey was conducted during the COVID-19 crisis, there was still a widespread recognition of climate change as a global emergency. Of 1.2 million respondents, 64% said that climate change was an emergency, presenting a clear and convincing call for decision makers to step up on ambition. But particularly young people are concerned. 70% of those under 18 years believe that climate change is a global emergency. Now, we all know that it will take bold decisions to achieve the necessary systemic change, and it is systemic change that we need going forward. Now, what we are suggesting is first that we need to invest in enhanced capabilities. We also need to invest, and above all, need to invest in high quality higher education and support innovation and technological development. And second, we also know that the way forward is no rocket science. It comes down to the incentives and the social norms that will reset how people and planet interact. And the choices leaders make today, as they build forward better, will be fundamental going forward, as I've said. And third, we need to actively explore and promote nature-based solutions. For example, the Human Development Report that we are discussing today argues that investing in forests could account for roughly a quarter of all the actions we must take this decade to stop global warming from reaching the 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And as UNDP, we are also preparing a new 3-part offer to build on the conversation the 2020 HDR has opened. And this new offer will include expertise and tools that help governments and decision makers to make different policy choices, building on the data in the report. Our offer will also include integrated programmatic and financial support that goes beyond quick technical fixes, because we want to accelerate the transition towards greener and more equitable development paths. And finally, we want to offer tailored national and local policy dialogues to support the evolution of new social norms and build coalitions for change. When it comes to COVID-19, our support is designed to help decision makers look beyond recovery. In order to achieve this, our offer focuses on four main areas. It's governance, social protection, green economy, and digital disruption. Our team in Kosovo, under the leadership of Maria, is already working in designing interventions in all these areas. New initiatives are launched for improving access to integrated social protection for the most vulnerable groups, for promoting green economy through ecotourism, and for assessing Kosovo's readiness for digital transformation. And of course, governance continues to be the backbone of our efforts, as it is elsewhere in the region. But for none of these initiatives, we will be successful without the cooperation of all actors. We need to work together across sectors and disciplines, and we also need to bring science and the civil society into the conversation. We need to find accelerators that will make this transition possible. We need to find the game changers, and hopefully this Human Development Report will be such a game changer in our conversation. But most of all, and I'm looking to the leaders that are with us today, we need to have the courage to invest in new ideas going forward and to test and to take risks in a certain way as well. So I thank you for joining us today. I thank you, Maria, for organizing this, and our Swedish co-hosts, and I very much look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mirjana, in highlighting some of the key messages, but also the proposed way forward. As you say, none of us can do this alone. It is joint efforts that is required. And that's why it's great to have so many of you with us today. It's really a start of a longer journey, as I see it. But next, I would like to turn to our next speaker. We have an honor to have Mr. Muharrem Nitaj, the Minister of Economy and Environment, with us. We look forward to hearing from you on how you see this messaging relating to Kosovo's specific context, the specific challenges, but also the way forward. So I would like to give the floor to you, Minister.
Thank you, Maria. Dear Ms. Spoljaric Egger, Ambassador Hernmarck, dear guests and participants. I have the pleasure of joining you today for the launch of the Global Human Development Report in Kosovo. I will continue my speech in Albanian because it's much more easy for me, and I hope you understand me. And I hope you have translation.
We have started this new year, and we can see still from 2020, even because the global development had a problem because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and this happened in Kosovo too, of course. In 2020, it was important in dealing with different challenges, political, economic, but mainly health crisis. Global economies had problems decrease, and this deepened the inequality because the pandemic did not treat everyone the same. It's a very interesting to mention and say for all of us, actually to join UNDP's engagement, because they are publishing results of their study through measures in so many fields that have been affected directly from the pandemic, like education, like a recovery of the lifestyle and all of these. But most important, it's the health sector out of all of these. And honorable participants, with approval of the law for economic recovery and with some additional decisions, our government have tried to help all levels of our society so that they can come across and deal with this crisis, but in some cases could be some problems. But it's important that we, through political consensus during the global pandemic, it's very important for all of us. So focusing ourselves in improving health capacities, infrastructure, and human resources, we want to make sure that saving lives is our main, most important task. Measures that government have undertaken first were seen some skepticism, but we have managed to put things under control, the spread of the virus, and we ensure the security for many people, for health workers, staff, and for all the workers. The purpose was to build the sustainability so the economic cycle to continue. Last year wasn't easy, and the consequences probably will be felt in next period of like next year and this year as well. But anyway, since we started now with the global vaccination, we will continue to ensure that we support economy, private sector, and especially for the ones that are most in needs. And different fiscal measures, economic supports that have been designed uh, from our policies, hopefully will stimulate and help those businesses that have been affected the most from the COVID-19 pandemic. Since we are trying to look ahead, we know that the focus of development have to be most comprehensive and focused there, and maintain, not use, and using the energy that it's very important to make sure to supply, to have energy, like so that the investors can come here. The part that is very important is environment. We have so much problems and challenges when it comes to environment. So it is very important to know, like power plants that have been inherited from the former Yugoslavia are old, and it's not something we can be proud of. As you know, we have opened up a new path to have to use another capacity of energy, which is called this using a solar system with wind and water. We want to fulfill this standard till 2030 with 35 of capacities with this renewable energy. We are in the phase of seeing who are investors that are interested to work in this field of the renewable energy. In the June of this year, we are planning to open up some kind of place where we can see who is interested in this alternative energy. We have given a license or green light for installing the gas, and we are in a full coordination with MCC, with Berge, with other bodies, so that we don't have any delay in this process. So what it is that I want to highlight, and I am repeating, I want to highlight that all of these actions in Kosovo have to be taken really, really seriously. You know that Mother Teresa have said that it's a big number of people who do big actions, but unfortunately, it's a small number of people who do small actions. So Kosovo, it's a small country, and we will try with our small actions to identify and see what is a global project so that we can protect environment and nature. But the issue of energy in Kosovo, unfortunately, it's more than the ensuring the energy has become problem. It's an issue of and above all, it's an issue, social issue as well, and a human issue. In our system, we have about 5,000 workers that were in this sector that are directly involved, and then we have to have a careful approach in this segment. So this, we hope to have more friendly Kosovo for investors and to develop innovative business, sustainable business, improve employment, especially young students and women. And this can help and also see what are priorities later on, and also important trainings in different kind of professions, and determine priorities so that we can protect environment, invest in human development. And this is a very necessary and the path that we need to follow.
Dear friends, once again, I'm delighted I have been able to join you today. I wish you further years of success as you explore many areas of importance to human development. Your focus on people is what makes this report unique in determining the global development process. Thank you, and to everyone who joined us today for this virtual meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Nitaj. Thank you so much for highlighting some of the challenges. As said, 2020 has been a challenging year for everyone, and obviously, you know, there is still a lot of work ahead of us in recovering from COVID. At the same time, it is an opportunity to build towards a more sustainable, environmentally sustainable Kosovo as well. Thank you so much for your statement. Now I would like to turn to our co-host, Swedish Ambassador Karin Hernmarck. Thank you for joining us today. As said, Sweden is an important partner for UNDP globally, but also in Kosovo. I know sustainable development is at the heart of everything you do, and also in Kosovo, particularly environmental sustainability is one of your key priorities. So I would like to give the floor to you for your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Minister Nitaj, Assistant Secretary General Spoljaric Egger, panelists, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to be here today at the Kosovo launch of the Human Development Report 2020. Sweden was selected as the host country for the global launch of the report in December, and we were represented by Her Royal Highness Crown Princess Victoria and Prime Minister Stefan Löfven at the event, as a mark of the importance we put on the report and what it entails. Today, we look back on 30 years of human development reports. They were groundbreaking when first launched and have had a fundamental impact on how we view and relate to development policy. One of the first obstacles to human development is the lack of data. Before we can address the issues we face, be it the climate crisis, gender equality, or global economic inequality, we need to understand the problem. The HDR provides us with a better understanding to equip us to tailor our responses. The HDR 2020 is taking breaking work one step further by including data on the human pressure put on our planet's limited resources and capabilities through the Planet Adjusted Human Development Index. As a long-time advocate for transformative climate action, Sweden strongly welcomes this more honest way of measuring human development. As the UN Secretary General has pointed out, our planet is in a state of climate emergency. Our relationship with other species is in crisis, with an alarming acceleration of species extinction because of our activities on land and at sea. The COVID-19 pandemic is a further challenge. Not only do we need to build back better, but more importantly, greener. The recovery must be aligned with the ambitions and goals laid out in Agenda 2030 and the Paris Accords. And all of humanity, men and women, need to take part. Allow me to be frank. We, as an industrialized country with the means to transition, must lead the way. Rich countries that are causing the most damage must shoulder their fair share of responsibility. Sweden also has a long way to go. Our material footprint is too large to be sustainable, as our carbon emissions. However, we are taking forceful action towards a more sustainable future. The Swedish government has introduced the highest carbon tax in the world and a robust climate act, and is committed to achieving climate neutrality by 2045. As for Sweden's International Development Cooperation, we work to support countries to make the climate-friendly choices, including in Kosovo. In Kosovo, we have a long-standing partnership with the Ministry of Environment and the Kosovo Environmental Protection Agency, something we will build on in the upcoming strategy period. The Kosovo Human Development Report will be a valuable asset to our cooperation. Sweden is increasing our financing to international climate action and biodiversity to build resilience for the most exposed people, the most vulnerable to climate change and environmental degradation. Now is the time to take concrete action, to robustly invest in green technology and put an end to fossil fuel subsidies, phase out oil production, stop the construction of new coal power plants, and instead integrate the goal of carbon neutrality into all economic and fiscal policies and decisions. Change is possible by basing political decisions on do no harm principles and introducing incentives for nature-based solutions and respecting human rights, gender equality, and democratic values. These things are all interlinked. We don't have any time to lose. We, as humanity, need to fundamentally change our relationship with nature and with each other. The report we are launching here in Kosovo has a strong message. A just transition can only be achieved by addressing environmental, social, and economic issues together. Change for the better through cooperation is possible, with people and the planet at the core. This is a future worth fighting for. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Karin. Very inspiring words. And I think that Kosovo is lucky to have a partner like Sweden, also showing by example and also sharing some of the lessons learned. As said, we're in this together, and obviously to move forward, we need to be working all together across the disciplines, across sectors. Now I would like to invite our colleague, Ben Slay, who is the Senior Economic Advisor for the Regional Bureau, to provide an overview of the key results of the report. I see Ben is there. He is all the way in California, so it's very early for you right now. So he will be providing us a bit of an introduction to what new this report brings and how these results relate to particularly this sub-region neighborhood. So I would like to give the floor to you, Ben, and after that we will have some time for questions and answers as well. I know Mirjana will have to leave after 1 hour, so we will have until then, and then we continue with the panel. But now, over to Ben.
Well, thank you very much, Maria. Please permit me to share my screen. And I will now move into the presentation. Okay, well, Minister Nitaj, Ambassador Hernmarck, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a pleasure for me to present this report and give a bit of detail to some of the themes that we're discussing. But let's start with the broadest question of what is human development and what do we mean by this term? Human development is a paradigm that puts people at the center of development in order to create more capabilities and opportunities for people to help us make the most of our lives, but not at the expense of future generations. Human development can be measured by the Human Development Index, or so-called HDI. And there are, of course, other human development indicators and data as well, some of which we'll look at. It's important to mention that the principal architects of this paradigm were Mahbub ul Haq, the first head of UNDP's Human Development Report Office, and Amartya Sen, the recipient of the 1998 Nobel Prize in Economics for his work in developing this paradigm. As has been pointed out, we're talking about the 30th anniversary report of human development. The first one came out in 1990. This report focuses on renewing human development for the Anthropocene, the age in which humans are the dominant effect on the dominant drivers of changes in the natural environment. It focuses also on mechanisms to catalyze change and on new human development metrics. The key principles that are emphasized in the report are stewardship, equity, and innovation. And the key mechanisms, as has been pointed out, for realizing these principles are incentives, regulations, nature-based systems, and social norms and values. The report begins from the premise that inequalities and planetary pressures are a vicious circle that mutually reinforce each other. It's no secret that poor people are most vulnerable to the effects of climate change, for example, be they people living in low-lying coastal areas where the risks of flooding and hurricanes from sea level rise and warming ocean temperatures are particularly pronounced. Likewise, it's no secret that subsistence farmers who rely on ecosystem services for their livelihoods, be this access to water, good quality soil, are particularly likely to suffer from the effects of climate change and overstressed ecosystems. And it's likewise no secret that wealthy countries have the highest per capita environmental footprints impose great burdens on the ecosystems on which our civilization and human progress depend. Now, I mentioned briefly the Human Development Index, the HDI, as the key indicator to measure human development progress. But what is this? The HDI is a measure of people's abilities to live long and productive lives. And it does so by looking at three dimensions: health, education, and living standards. If a country had the best scores on these three dimensions, its HDI would be 1.0. The closest we come to it of the countries we're discussing here today is Sweden, which in the most recent HDI ranking was 7th in the world, which had an HDI of 0.945. The data for the HDI are collected along 4 indicators. For health, it's life expectancy at birth. For education, it's mean years of schooling and expected years of schooling. For living standards, it's gross national income per capita collected in purchasing power parity terms. So the HDI is a multi-dimensional welfare indicator that goes beyond income to provide a fuller measure of what development actually means for individuals. It's important to point out that the underlying data that are used in reporting the HDI come from national sources, national statistical offices, and are collected not by UNDP, but by the IMF, UNESCO, UNICEF, UNDESA. So all we do is essentially take a national data that has been quality assured and made comparable by other international partners rather than do this work ourselves. Well, so if that's what the HDI is, how do we, what sort of numbers do we see? We don't report HDI for Kosovo, but we can show HDIs for a number of Kosovo's neighbors. And what we see is if we look at other countries of the Western Balkans and Turkey, that we see that Montenegro, among Kosovo's neighbors, has the highest HDI in the most recent Human Development Report of 0.83. That was the 48th place in the global ranking, followed by Turkey in 54th place and Serbia in 64th. These countries are all considered to be countries of very high human development because they are above 0.8, which is the cutoff for very high human development. Sweden, as I said, is also in this category. Then Albania is very close to that cutoff, but it's not quite at 0.8. It's considered to be a country of high human development. Bosnia and Herzegovina is close behind. So Albania is in 69th position, Bosnia and Herzegovina at 73rd, and North Macedonia at 79th. That's the most recent data, the level, as it were, but we might also be interested in the trends of which of the neighbors of Kosovo have achieved the most progress over the last 20 years. And here we see that Turkey has actually made the most human development progress with a 24% increase in its HDI, followed by Albania with an 18% increase, and Bosnia and Herzegovina post-conflict with a 15% increase. The global average during this time was roughly 14.4%, with North Macedonia and Serbia close to the global average. So we can either look at the HDI as a measure of where you are now, or look at changes in the HDI over time to see how much progress has been made. Now, inequalities are a major concern, of course, for all of us, and the Human Development Index can be modified to show the effects of inequalities. It can be adjusted to show the amount of variance along the three components of the HDI for income, education, and life expectancy. And these reductions that reflect the variance along these three components can be seen as losses in human development due to inequality. And when we do this, we have the so-called inequality adjusted Human Development Index, or IHDI. That raises the question of how do these losses look in the neighborhood to which Kosovo belongs? And here I would mention that the global average loss for a country is roughly 20%. In other words, roughly 20% of the human development potential is lost because of inequalities. Well, it turns out that all of Kosovo's neighbors have, of course, losses in human development due to inequalities, but losses that are less than the global average, ranging from 9% in Montenegro to 17% in Turkey. So this idea of adjusting the Human Development Index to reflect something that's undesirable is something that the Human Development Report and the Human Development Report Office has been doing for some time. In this case, it's inequalities, but it can also be done to reflect the impact of planetary pressures. And this is the so-called planetary adjusted HDI, or PHDI, which we'll now focus on. We are now looking at adjusting HDIs for per capita greenhouse gas emissions and material footprints. And when we do that, we see a picture that is shown on the graph on the right-hand side, where planetary pressures grow disproportionately as human development increases. That is to say, the greater the Human Development Index value along the horizontal axis, the greater you are, further you are to the right-hand side, the more likely you are to deviate from the 45-degree line, showing equality between Human Development Index, or HDI, and the planetary pressure adjusted HDI, which is what is shown on the vertical axis. And this really raises a fundamental question of whether human development can be decoupled from planetary pressures, whether it's possible to get closer back towards that 45-degree line and reduce the amount of planetary pressures that are associated with human development over time. And I'm going to argue, as we'll see subsequently, that it's easier to decouple human development and move towards this 45-degree line for greenhouse gas emissions than it is for material footprints. And I'll explain what I mean by that subsequently. Okay. So let's take a look at the planetary pressures in the neighborhood. And this graph shows how much HDI is in effect lost due to planetary pressures for Kosovo's neighbors. The global average is roughly 7.3%. That's how much of a deviation we see from that 45-degree line. That's how much of a deviation there is between the Human Development Index and the HDI adjusted for planetary pressures. And we see that, for example, Albania has a smaller than global average deviation, a smaller measure of planetary pressures, whereas Montenegro is at the other end of the spectrum with a planetary pressure measure that is greater than the global average. Well, what that means is when you recalculate the global rankings to reflect not just the Human Development Index, but also the planetary adjusted Human Development Index, then countries can change their rankings, and Albania actually moves up 28 positions in the global ranking when it's the PHDI, the planetary adjusted HDI, that we're looking at. By contrast, Montenegro drops 1 position in the global PHDI rankings. Well, as I said, we don't report on the HDI for Kosovo, but there are data such as, for example, on energy and energy intensity that come from the World Bank and others that may be interesting to look at in this context. In particular, energy is important because energy is a driver both of greenhouse gas emissions and of material footprints, the amount of resources that are used, pulled out of the ground to support consumption and economic development. So the most recent World Bank data for energy intensity measured in terms of megajoules per dollar of GDP in per capita terms show that on average, it takes 5.8 megajoules to produce a dollar of GDP with the most recent data. Kosovo, as well as Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, were above the global average, whereas Montenegro, North Macedonia, Turkey, and Albania were below. So that's one way of thinking about how Kosovo might be compared to some of its neighbors along this dimension. I mentioned earlier that if we want to decouple human development from planetary pressures, and if we measure planetary pressures in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and material footprint, it raises the question of which is easier to decouple. Is it easier to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Or is it easier to reduce material footprint? And if decarbonization is a metaphor for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and waste management is a way of reducing material footprint, it actually turns out that decarbonization seems to be easier in terms of this decoupling. What do we mean by this? Well, if we look at the change in per capita greenhouse gas emissions between 2010 and 2017, during this time, on a per capita basis, the world average was 0. That is to say, on a per capita basis, greenhouse gas emissions during this time didn't change hardly at all. And that's because for countries, whereas like Turkey or Bosnia, where the per capita greenhouse gas emissions rose, there were countries in the very high human development category, like Sweden, the OECD countries in general, that actually saw declines in greenhouse gas emissions per capita. But it wasn't only the OECD countries, it was also some of Kosovo's neighbors, such as North Macedonia and Montenegro, that recorded significant declines in per capita greenhouse gas emissions. Now, this was due largely to the transition away from coal and the adoption of more energy efficient technologies in general, which perhaps poses some relevance and lessons for Kosovo as well. The point is, it is possible to have improvements in human development while keeping, on a per capita basis, greenhouse gas emissions constant. That's what we see for the most recent, if we like, 8 years that we have data for. But then when we look at changes in per capita material footprints, that is to say, the resources, the natural capital pulled out of the ground to support consumption, we see a different story. During the same 7-year period, per capita material footprints globally grew by 11%. And we see this growth also in the countries with very high human development. It was only the OECD countries that recorded a slight decline of 3% in per capita material footprint. Kosovo's neighbors, Montenegro, Serbia, North Macedonia, Turkey, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, all saw increases in per capita material footprints during this time. So this is more and more plastics, more and more wastes entering into landfills, more and more plastic bottles being thrown away and finding its way into our rivers and oceans with potentially devastating consequences for our ecosystem. So if we want to reduce our planetary pressures and improve our planetary adjusted HDIs, it really matters what is happening in terms of the different components. So in conclusion, let me suggest what this report implies for suggestions for policy, programming, and development strategies for the neighborhood in which Kosovo finds itself. If we look at incentives and see incentives being driven in large measure by policies, the report strongly calls for reductions in fossil fuel subsidies. Fossil fuel subsidies not only are incentives to do the wrong thing, so to speak, to have more coal, more oil, more gas, but they also represent burdens on budgets. And if fossil fuel subsidies could be reduced, in addition to helping to get the prices right, as economists would say, reductions in fossil fuel subsidies can also finance reductions in measures, can also finance measures to reduce inequality, such as increasing investment in social protection, to close gaps in social safety nets, to reduce taxes on labor, to make it easier for employers to formally hire workers and to create good jobs. The report also calls for investments, greater investments in renewable energy and energy efficiency, more investments in waste management and recycling. In terms of regulation, the report calls for different approaches to land use planning, to green cities and have urbanization be more closely linked to the green economy paradigm. Regulation can be used to set targets for recycling programs, targets that can be national, regional, or local at the level of municipalities. And in terms of social norms and values, more could be done to make the phrase reduce, reuse, recycle a household phrase, something that everyone knows about and thinks about in their daily lives. Promoting circular economy solutions, so we don't just use things up and throw them away, but have products designed and waste management systems created in order to reuse things, and then to empower local communities to make better use of the opportunities for nature-based solutions, whether this is in terms of sustainable forestry, whether this is in terms of, for example, ecotourism and other areas as well. So with this, I would conclude the presentation of the report. I hope you find it interesting, and I hope that also that there are many ways in which this report can be useful for discussions, policy formulation, and implementation in Kosovo to help us make a more equal and sustainable world for all of us. Thank you very much. Faleminderit, Fala lepo.
Thank you so much, Ben, for translating some of the many messages of the report into, interesting, fascinating graphs, but also to kind of, we know the report is very rich in substance, a lot of analysis, a lot of food for thought. And I think that you very nicely kind of laid out what it means for this region. In the meanwhile, there's been a question also on why Kosovo is not included in the report. So I would just kindly ask you to respond to that, while also inviting other questions. So if anyone has any questions, please use the Q&A function and we will pick up the questions from there. But you will also have a chance to ask questions a little bit later. So I'll just quickly, Ben, if you could elaborate on that question.
Certainly. Well, as I said, UNDP only uses data that come from other international agencies. So the IMF provides the data on the per capita GDP, UNESCO provides the data on education and WHO and especially the UNDESA provide the data on life expectancy. And if these agencies don't collect the data from Kosovo, we are not able to feed it into the Human Development Reports Office calculations for human development indexes, and then place Kosovo in the ranking. And that's the short answer. There's a longer answer about why that is, and that relates to broader questions concerning status and other matters. But from a statistical perspective, simply as UNDP, if we don't get the data from the agencies that are obliged to provide it to us under UN General Assembly resolutions, we simply have nothing to work with.
Thank you, Ben. And also just to add to that, UNDP Kosovo has produced so far, I believe, 9 Kosovo Human Development Reports on different themes. The last one was in 2017, if I don't remember wrong. As said, we're now planning, we're just kicking off the process of starting to prepare the next Kosovo Human Development Report, which will be very much in these lines, and utilizing also some same methodologies. So it's also going to be an opportunity for us to look at what the data gaps are, and how we could improve the database together, working with various partners. So that work is just about to start, and we would really look forward to working with as many as possible with you. So hopefully that responded to the question. And I think then there is more detailed questions on this. Very nice remarks also from Ulrika, our development coordinator, reminding that it is important not to lose sight of the essential relationship between people and the planet, on which needs to be healthy, respectful, and sustainable. We definitely also some questions on who to get in touch with in terms of waste management, circular economy, innovative green economy. We have lots of colleagues in our regional hub in Istanbul, but also globally. These are many of the themes that we will be working on also in moving forward. I wonder if we have more questions coming. Also, any of the fellow panelists, speakers, if you have any quick question before we move to the actual panel. I think we have just 2 more. There's a question. Yes, please.
Okay, well, Faliminderi, thank you so much for these questions. With regards to incentives to promote regeneration of areas of degradation, this is an excellent point, and I think it's especially important for much of the Western Balkans, where because of demographic and population trends, many people are leaving rural areas and smaller towns and moving to capital and large cities. And nature is slowly but inexorably starting to reclaim places that had before been urban and dominated by people. And this really offers many opportunities to recreate, to reinvest in ecosystems, to provide stronger ecosystem services. There's a debate about what to do about so-called depopulation in much of the Western Balkans and some other countries further east that we work in as well. And oftentimes the focus is on what to do about migration, what to do about the development of the cities where people are moving to, but the environmental dimensions of nature slowly reclaiming depopulated areas is rarely taken up. So for example, what do we do in schools where the classes are getting smaller and smaller? Is it possible to close some of the schools and to spend more time in nature with children, for example. This is just one of the sort of ideas that we may wish to explore. With regards to deforestation, I think that this is a very good discussion to have with UNDP colleagues in Kosovo. I would add that a number of Kosovo's neighbors have actually seen an increase in forest cover in the last 2 decades, in part because of the reductions in population that have allowed for trees to reclaim space that people used to live in before. But it's not just about the trees, it's about the income that sustainable forestry can generate. And this is something that's of relevance not only in Kosovo and its neighbors, but all over the world. Where I'm speaking to you from California, where we had terrible fires this past summer and fall because of unsustainable forestry management practices. So this is something that the UN globally is concerned about, is working on, and there's a great deal of expertise that can be brought to bear on this problem in Kosovo as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. I think we will still have time for more questions as we move forward, but I think now is time for the exciting panel ahead of us. So thank you so much, Ben, for the most enlightening presentation. More questions might come, but I would like to now turn to the panel. We have 5 panelists, as said, representing different disciplines, different perspectives, and each talking from their own perspective on some of the kind of thoughts and ideas that this report kind of inspired in them. So I would like to start first with Mimoza Kusari Lila, Member of Parliament and Chairwoman of the Green Caucus Group. I know you're a great advocate for environmental sustainability. And we had a brief discussion on how to promote kind of a more coherent, comprehensive, sustainable development in Kosovo that really addresses the multiple crises that we're faced with, and how to use this COVID kind of recovery also for the benefit of the environment. So I would like to turn over to you, Mimoza. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria, and greetings for everyone, all the dignitaries. It's a special pleasure to be here. In particular, that it's a time off from a busy political discussion, and this is definitely much more meaningful and absolutely on a theme that is very important to all of us. Special thanks to the Embassy of Sweden and Ambassador to support this launch, and I certainly hope that in the near future we will have Kosovo as a part of Global Human Development Report, as I also appreciate the UNDP's Kosovo Human Development Report. Actually, there's a lot of thoughts that are important to be stressed at this point. I think one of the most important is the fact that it was already mentioned, the data collection. The importance of having reliable data and importance to having the statistical agency up to the task that we have the data, not only as a politician, but also the industry and the planning. The planning element, I think what we have seen with the Green Caucus Group in two consecutive legislations on the 6th and 7th legislation, there is a lack of coordination in a long-term planning. What we've seen is that even in the policymaking, the high-ranking level in Kosovo, there is always the idea that economic development is separate from the environmental issues and the energy development resources. The idea is that we are trying to approach, and I'm hoping that as we are coming forward with the 8th legislation and the new government, hopefully soon, we will have one development strategy that will include, have a backbone, the environmental agenda, then jointly with it develop the economic and also the energy capacities. I actually think that we've missed the chance at the term during 2020. The impact of COVID was definitely huge and multi-sectoral. However, we'd had a discussion on the economic recovery law and economic recovery program. Not much or not at all the environmental agenda or recycling or the economy that could have been, we could have planted seeds of the new economy will lead eventually to circular economy future. There was no focus on the fact that trying to actually promote two areas, green economy and then advancement of digital agenda. The both are so needed, and we've seen that the both can be used as a great instrument to handle even future challenges if we're talking about potential extension of pandemic or in general, if we want to advance. Element that had shown it had come more is the impact it had in women, in particular in women in business. I think we had used or need to use this period to have integrated strategy also on marginalized groups like women in business. And that I've seen that the first and the foremost that we've seen from when we were isolated is that women carried the heaviest burden. And we cannot allow the system that leaves women with double burden as opposed to men in our society if we want to have in the future human development index in Kosovo hopefully measured, but need more mechanisms toward equality. So I definitely am fond of the fact that we'll be hoping that we will have a longer and a legislation in a full term that we'll be able to carry on the with the Green Caucus Group, with the Green Agenda, that to coordinate with institutions and that put forward the fact that we cannot assume that we'll continue and develop a new economic strategy without taking in consideration what's happening right now with the environment. And on concluding my this presentation, I would also like to state the necessity to also revise all of the current legislation on the hydropower plants and of course the use of water, something that in Kosovo had gone tremendously wrong during the past year, and it's continuing further. Energy sustainability is very important. But definitely we cannot overlook the fact that we have caused a tremendous damage to the environment, in particular with what's happening with hydropower plants. In conclusion, I'm hoping that I'm hoping that in the near future we will have Kosovo, as I stated at the beginning, as a part of Human Development Report, Global Human Development Report, and also be able to have concrete mechanisms that will actually enable us to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mimoza. Very important messages, and particularly on following up on the point of data, the critical importance of data, and as a basis of evidence-based decision-making, but also for empowering people. And I think that there I would like to move on to Lerta Kaci, who is the Executive Director of Open Data Kosovo. Open Data Kosovo designs, develops, and creates digital solutions for a wide portfolio of partners, including Kosovo institutions. So I would like to give the floor to you in elaborating a bit on the importance of data and what we can do to make it actually more useful, more accessible, and as a basis of joint planning. And Mimoza, we will get back to you with some questions as well. But now we move to Lerta. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Really a great pleasure to be part of launching this new report. Indeed, a new area requires new measures of human development. So I congratulate UNDP for this. It would be, I follow up the previous presentation by saying that it would be great if Kosovo in the near future would be also part of this. So it is because I represent a civic tech organization which which we worked really closely with such creative digital solutions that requires open format data that can help people make sense of their issues that they care most about by analyzing, comparing, and reading this data. So I would like to start my remarks by highlighting some of the efforts that have been accomplished in Kosovo in this regard. So the Kosovo government actually adopted the Charter for the Opening of Data and making public data free for use since May 2016. And the Agency of Information Society furthermore launched the Open Data Portal, which now has around 200 data sets. But the reason why I started these remarks is that there is room for improvement when it comes to electronic interoperability platforms through which institutions, electronic systems interact and communicate. Because in a fast-paced world of data and technology, flexibility and agility is very important now more than ever. So making these data more appealing and more applicable and also communicate to each other is key. So I wanted to mention this because it's very important for the data related to the Human Development Index that it was mentioned before, and also sharing that we are continuously working also to put Kosovo in other important indexes that would highlight what is the situation in different perspectives in Kosovo, such as Global Data Barometer, Open Budget Index, and such questions actually help us, like in the report, that we have to really focus on the solutions to a problems that are not disconnected from ourselves or from something else, but in the area of changing demographics in Kosovo, we have increasingly diverse needs and shifting markets. This means that these diverse people, especially youth, need to prepare to participate as social advocates that can innovate in the future to make this planet as our top priority. When it comes to economic recovery, I would just like to also follow up with the first presentation of the minister that said that actually trainings and other programs that focus on youth can increase, especially women bounce back from this crisis that were also mentioned. So to continue the discussion, I would leave more time for people to drop by any questions, but to conclude my presentation, I would just like to say that we need to bring all together, the government, the civil society, academia, and private sector for better data, better decision-making, and better lives. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Blerta. Obviously, a lot has been done and very exciting, innovative initiatives. We're also in discussions with ODK on, expanding our collaboration, particularly as we move forward with the HDR. So very inspiring. I think we move on to the next. We're going quickly through the panelists, and then we will have a second round with questions. Next, we will have Bisar Azemi, the Executive Director of Balkan Green Foundation, very much engaged with the Western Balkans transition towards sustainable future and European integration. And you're particularly focusing on renewable energy development, energy market integration, and circular economy. I see there's actually been quite a few questions also on circular economy also in the chat box. So obviously a theme of great interest. So maybe as a question to you, would be interesting to hear whether you see that the whole COVID crisis has actually increased people's awareness of the critical kind of balance between people and or the more aware of the pressures that we're putting on the environment as humans, and what can be done really to empower people to take action, and also on green recovery. How do you think that that could be kind of advanced in Kosovo? So Visar, sorry, many questions, but
well, many questions. I will try to answer them, but thank you very much, Maria, for inviting me in this panel. I would like to greet also my fellow panelists as well. It's very nice to be back here and discuss with you all, you know, the challenges that are in front of us that we have to work together in order to sort them out and set a new pathway for Kosovo. So certainly environmental issues are not a responsibility of a single person and neither of a group of people. You know, environment is a responsibility of all of us as a society, and we have to act collectively. So we all have to take responsibilities and actions towards a better environment and better future. In other words, to maybe think in what shape we are leaving the earth for next generations to come. And this certainly gives us some responsibilities and some actions that we need to take. Certainly, this requires a behavioral change, especially for our region. We saw that the Western Balkans is sitting somewhere similarly with neighboring countries. Unfortunately, we are not having data for Kosovo to measure the HDI, but I would imagine that we would be in the same range of data where Turkey and other Western Balkan 6 countries rely on. Unfortunately, this has to also perhaps be a critique to the government because they're not providing enough data for the HDI and not proper data, as I would say. Back to the question. So business as usual is not going to continue or should not continue. So COVID-19, when we were facing this challenge in the summer of 2020 and also in the months after that, we saw that humans can really play an important role in decreasing some negative impacts to the nature. I know, Maria, when you and I talked on the phone, you wanted me to find some data, some tangible numbers so we can compare and see what they really mean for Kosovo. And I was able to secure, unfortunately, not a lot of them. So for GHG emissions, Kosovo has stopped collecting data since 2013, which, you know, we don't really know what's going on in that field on the climate change issues and so on. Air pollution has been a tremendous problem in Kosovo, and for those of you who are here for like a few years, we have witnessed how bad of a winters we've had in the past few years from the air pollution. Unfortunately, you know, we don't have data which is, how to say, collected for each month. So the average data that has been presented, we see that Kosovo is sitting in the upper limit of the boundary. And this unfortunately tells us that as an accumulative data, this is measuring numbers in the winter and summer, which we can only think that the you know, winters have been really, really bad. In terms of PM10s and PM2.5, I can read them out loud to you if you're interested. We know that the limit value for PM10.0 is 40, and since 2000, let's say 15, 16, 17, we have 48.91, 33.85, 34.71, and 41.57. This is telling us that we really had bad winters, which made it possible to balance these data, but still put them in the upper limit of the boundary. So we need to educate ourselves. We need to put these kind of environmental issues a part of our DNA. So one should not think whether is it okay to pollute or to burn something out, which is going to release pollution and gases and so on. But we have to collectively, as a society, change our behavior, change the way we're thinking, and do and act in accordance with what is allowed and what is not allowed to do and to harm the environment. So these are the some of the things that I would like to highlight here. One other thing that a couple of our fellow panelists also mentioned was deforestation, and unfortunately deforestation is a major issue, not only in Kosovo, because some of the mountains that are being deforested are cross-border issues. Some are with Serbia, some are with Albania, Macedonia. So this has to find a solution to stop deforestation and do more in planting trees and managing the deforestation properly throughout the region of Kosovo. Where do we lack? I mean, we do have strategies, we do have all the good documents, we don't have action plans, and we don't implement these strategies. So this is a criticism that I would like to make to the government of Kosovo. Unfortunately, the minister has left. We need to find ways how to make them sit and listen to the voices of people in civil society and experts in the fields. That we really have to act now. As the video explained in the beginning, business as usual cannot continue. We need to change. We need to change our behavior. We need to change the way we think. Incorporate environmental issues in our DNA. So we care for the planet and we care for the future of our the upcoming generations. I will, just you mentioned circular economy. Just a couple of things. Circular economy has not yet been understood properly, not only by institutions but also by people as well. So there is a lot to be done in this field. We need to advocate more. We need to educate institutions how to treat waste, how to treat collecting trash throughout the region, and in order to pave the way and give, let's say, companies a chance to come and do circular economy. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. So I will stop here. I'm here for more questions and in the discussion.
Thank you so much, Visar. Many important points, and also identifying several gaps, especially data gaps where data is missing for really informed decision making and planning, sustainable planning. So thank you for this. We will return to you, but now I would like to turn to Dr. Peter Middlebrook, who is CEO of Geopolity, a political economist with practical experience in more than 40 countries. In Kosovo, he's leading a team of economic advisory support that is being provided to the UN Kosovo team as part of the socioeconomic response plan to the COVID. So Peter has been working with us in advising on the whole green recovery and building forward better and much more, particularly when it comes to partnerships and financing. So Peter, I would like to give the floor to you.
Thank you very much indeed, colleagues, my peer review, panel, experts. I'd like to start with, I'm not trying to be too contrarian. I believe we have the data, you see, this is the thing. 3 years ago, I think there was global headlines that 2/3 of wildlife has disappeared in the last 70 years, 50 years. Silence, it becomes a headline on BBC and CNN, the next day it's gone. So, I mean, you can drill down into that and you can ask, the minutiae of what's happening in a specific locality or ecosystem. But there's a disconnect, and there's a disconnect between that and people's perception, either that it affects them or that they have the power to make a difference. And I think this is where the reorganization needs to start, because, you know, I mean, part of the design of democracy, and I'm not against democracies, but part of the design of democracies is you're all individuals, but individuals by themselves, even if they know something, they need to come together in the collective. Now, the old order was that we're organized through governments. Now, so that's the first fallacy. I think there's huge data needs, and we could be much more predictive in terms of understanding where we are. We could move politicians out the way and bring scientists in to say, this is actually how it is, and these are going to be the implications. That's the data side. I want to talk a little bit about the financing side, because, you know, after 2015, prior to, in fact, the Agenda 2030 being set, there was the discussion in Addis on the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which was it was a watershed moment, because it basically said that meeting these new goals will not be accomplished by government spending and official development assistance, which is how we thought about, you know, the human development goals and much of the national development strategies to date. But there was a recognition that, in fact, the only way, and this remains true, the only way that we can solve this problem is by crowding in, not crowding out private capital. And for that to happen, the dialogue needs to change and the partnerships need to change. And the way we think about the way we finance solutions also need to change. Well, I spent 20 years, as you know, Maria, in the public sector, not for profit. I'm also now a private businessman, and businesses will not take decisions where they're going to lose money, even if they believe it's the right thing to do. And that's where the strategic partnerships become extremely important. There's also, you know, there are data issues, but in the aggregate, we know the impact that we're having. There are $700 trillion in futures and derivatives markets. And I remember, I think 2 years ago at the high-level political forum, when I was the private sector representative on the discussions on the Convention on Biodiversity and the new round of funding of $5 billion. Now, $5 billion, it seems like a lot of money to us, but it's nothing. It really is nothing. There are 5,000 companies with a turnover of more than $5 billion. And those 5,000 companies, some of them are very engaged, but some of them are not engaged at all in this process. And then there's you transacting it down at the level of Kosovo, where I'm optimistic that if the political establishment and the markets and the big capital, which is now aware of these issues, and probably all of you colleagues, you saw the launch the other day of what's called the Terra Carta. The Terra Carta is just $8 billion start, but it's a way of saying, how do we internalize these externalities? Because by the time we figure this out, if it's too late, we have a problem. So there's a lot of discussions now, Maria, on very innovative partnerships, those who are not for profit working with for-profit agencies to draw down risk, to allow private capital to flow into markets where it is not traditionally done, for energy, for transport, for industry, and for all the next generation of that level of innovation. And there's so much happening there to be excited about. What we see from, I mean, the last year we've worked probably across more than 20 countries. The countries which are responding most quickly tend to be city-states. And remember this, 70% of the world are going to live in municipalities, in urban areas, right? So it's the municipality and this urban center and this kind of natural resource arrangement is going to be extremely important. So just in terms of financing modalities, again, it's not the money, it's not the data, it's not the individual or institutional awareness, it's bringing it all together in a dialogue that says, we are the people we have been waiting for. We're not going to advocate for somebody else. We are going to do it now. And this, I think, is the opportunity that Kosovo has on the back of the new national development strategy, covering a period of 2021 to 2030, of not just to do business as usual, not another document that you turn and say, yes, we know all this. And that's why I like the term development pathways. Development pathways implies there's not one way of doing things. It's a dialogue. It's about innovation. It's about looking at the empirical data that Kosovo may have. It's about relationships between the public sector, the international community, civil society, private sector, innovators, all of these elements. And that dialogue is the thing which perhaps is going to make a difference. There are hundreds of new commercial financing modalities for conservation. for dealing with aspects of the circular economy, others as well. So I'm excited about that. And I think in Kosovo, I think it'd be a wonderful opportunity to take this brilliant report and to unpack it, to say, well, what does it mean collectively for us over the next 8, 9, 10 years? What does it mean that we're doing right? What we call, you know, the good stuff. And then there's the sins of commission and the sins of omission. The sins of commission are things we're doing that we shouldn't be doing. And there's the sins of omission, the things we're not doing that we should. And I think if we can identify those, I remain an optimist. Thank you, Maria.
Maria,
Sorry.
your microphone.
Yes. Okay, now I'm unmuted again. Thank you so much, Peter. Yes, as we know, we have a lot of information in front of our eyes, so it's all up to us to take action and to choose a different pathway, as you're also saying. I think, and bringing forward some of the key messages from this report, I think will be a way for us all to engage on this, you know, kind of new pathway to choose. So thank you, Peter. We will come back to you.
Sure.
We will have one more panelist, a bit of a different perspective to things, but very exciting, refreshing. We have Hannah Sejab, who is graduated in costume design from London College of Fashion, where she researched wearable technology and interactive garments. And she established a fashion tech and slow fashion studio, Fight or Flight, in Pristina a few years back, 2018. So very, I think, you know, there's been a lot of discussion about circular economy and sustainable business and working with private sector, but I think you are representing all of this and very new, innovative ways of doing things. And obviously, that is the way forward. So it would be great to hear from you how you see how technology can be used, you know, for example, in your field of business in promoting sustainable development, sustainable and overall sustainable businesses. You know, how can they be promoted in Kosovo? So over to you, Hannah.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here actually and have the opportunity to share insights from, well, fashion industry, which I have to highlight that is the second largest polluter in the world based on a UN report that actually has an 80% of impact during the production process and before it reaches actually the stores. And then just considering that all the fast fashion brands and brands around the world are producing up to 24 collections a year, which is a lot, and almost 85% of the garments and of the textiles end up in landfill, which is basically made of polyester, chemicals, and oils. This is only for pure pleasure, basically, that can last for 2 days. And when I initiated Fight or Flight and wanted to really involve innovative perspective into garment creation, I just didn't want to have fashion just another item for pure pleasure. Basically, what we do at Fight or Flight with fashion wearable technology is conceptualize a garment and add a function to it and make it long lasting and timeless. What fashion wearable technology is, for maybe just to have a quick introduction, is that it combines functionality with garments. So the idea of fashion wearable technology is to really help us in everyday life. And probably you've been introduced to many gadgets, wearable tech gadgets, such as watches, for example, to do biometric measures of heart and temperature. And now this whole industry is shifting in another aspect, which is sustainability through technology. And I think it's a specific case this year with COVID that there's an extension of wearable tech that has been introduced through digitalization. What that means is that it helps the production process, meaning that instead of probably producing, as I mentioned before, 12 collections a year, we can now design our garments in the computer, see it and decide in which measures do we need it before we actually send it to production. So we don't have to overproduce it. We can actually make 2 or 3 garments based on our requirements. And this is just one aspect of innovative technology in fashion industry. And because of COVID last year, a lot of fashion brands couldn't really launch their collections properly. So everything that we've seen went really digital. So we've seen the collections being presented only digitally. And I think that's a progress in another level. What we are interested with Fight or Flight, and we're aiming to produce this year, is a 3D printed collection, which is a digital textiles, and it's another aspect of helping the environment, considering that printing textiles with 3D printers, basically, it's foreseen that maybe in the future we might have 3D printers at home and produce our own clothes. But the idea is that you don't have to transfer the collection back and forth from one country to the other, sampling and then send it to the final production. You can make it at home. You can design it yourself. Well, maybe in the future, but you can repair easily all the parts. It's quite energy efficient. And bottom line, it uses the material and the filament, which is recycled. And it's foreseen that it can be also recycled at the end of the garment's life cycle, which means out of a dress, you can make a bag. And I think it's a really interesting perspective on adding innovation into fashion industry. But also in another futuristic aspect, which kind of sometimes could sound like sci-fi, but I also say, like, we probably didn't think that smartphones could have been so useful to us, but here we are. And I totally believe that we might have functional garments as well in the future that uphold like different electronic components to do different measurements to our body. Could that be also medical, which I think it's really amazing. But what this means is if you produce fashion tech garments and add up these functionality, then you will reduce the consumption, meaning that instead of buying 5 items, you might buy 2, but have different function to the garment. And when I say different function, that is very literal, and it goes in many directions. We have been working also in garments and textiles that change the color. Also that can change the shape, and this is something very, very futuristic that will contribute to sustainability. I think these are all very, again, saying when I talk about fashion tech innovation for sustainability, it sounds a bit alien sometimes. It sounds a bit cyborg, but that's not what it means really. The idea is to, and what the industry is doing, is probably going to be introduced in the mass market in the next 10 years, is that it will use biotextiles with conductive capacity. It will use smallest components to add to the garment. That again makes the garment timeless. It increases the life cycle of the garment. And at the end, when you are done using that specific fashion tech item, you can biodegrade the biotextile and also use those electronic components in another garment. So it's really a broad perspective that is really intensively being explored and introduced around the world. And I really wanted to have that platform also in Kosovo, that it invites all the youngsters from fashion design, engineering, and all the other fields that want to explore other ways and alternatives in creating fashion design. Bottom line, also with slow fashion, which is a very conceptualized process of designing, putting a lot of thoughts to it and making a unique garment for the consumer. The idea is to sort of shift this behavior of consumerism into really making people understand the ethical way of consumption and understanding how much work goes into producing a specific collection, that we just buy it and just throw it a year after maybe. And that, bottom line, just harms the environment. I know this is a little bit probably, as we also spoke, that it could be quite far in the future, but all the labs around the world, starting from MIT and all the textile labs, are really going deep into finding all these ways of introducing technology into ethical production and consumerism.
Thank you so much, Hannah. A very inspiring perspective. And I think that here a lot of elements come together. We know youth unemployment and unemployment among women is particularly high in Kosovo. And these are also, the groups that have been particularly hard hit by the COVID crisis. So obviously moving forward in designing the recovery efforts, measures, those are the groups to be targeted. But obviously, how we, what kind of economic recovery we promote. And obviously here the theme is very much environmentally friendly, but how do we actually use technology to create new jobs, livelihoods? And I think that you've provided quite an interesting, inspiring example of that. So maybe I will actually move back to Mimoza on this point, going back to the whole kind of COVID recovery and how to not only to really create jobs and livelihoods and that will benefit people, but on the other hand, how do we empower? How do we empower young people and women particularly to become the agents of change, also when it comes to climate action, when it comes to environment, reducing the pressures that we are putting on environment. As we've seen in many cases is that still it's not considered a high priority, and there is relatively low awareness of the right, to live in a clean and healthy environment. What can be done in that regard?
Actually, Maria, I see that young people more and more, as I reach out and have seen activism, are more aware on a daily basis about the necessity and, as you're rightly saying, the right to live in a clean environment. We've seen so many civil society organizations that join forces or join strength together, despite their any differences they might have, but when it came to greater cause like water resources, like preventing query somewhere to open. So you see that one of the glitches in our system constantly is the rule of law. We've seen that even in the violation of the environmental legislation that is currently empowering Kosovo, or on different situations when you need to have institutions intervene, we had problems of the rule of law institutions to react. I believe that in the change of the course, when we have success stories, we all need to enable to promote success stories of women in business, of youth, or civil society organizations, and creative ideas of entrepreneurs that encourages others. Luckily, despite the fact that there's a lot of youngsters that are looking abroad for opportunities, there's still so much love and passion to stay in Kosovo if the opportunities are given. So I believe that next government should definitely have the focus on mechanisms to offer young entrepreneurs with the proper, of course, create a competitive process where young entrepreneurs can compete, let's say, in entrepreneurial fund with green ideas, with ideas that actually promote and advance further the economy while enhancing and bringing forward some of the values. So I think that we have, in particular, I've seen some great ideas for women entrepreneurs in recycling and in creating new products out of the used materials. So it's just a matter of having the right incentives, and I think the word is out. We still have a very vibrant and young population, and we cannot afford to lose it to other developed countries when there is a potential and possibilities in Kosovo.
Thank you so much, Mimoza. I'd also like to open the floor if any of the other panelists or speakers would like to respond the same to any other ideas for empowering particularly young people and to prevent the brain drain from Kosovo.
May I
think Visar has something to
Yes,
add.
I just wanted to bring up to your attention that Balkan Green Foundation, for example, has a specific program called Balkan Green Ideas. Every year we have a competition for green startups and green ideas. So we divide both, and we support both with financial means. So $10,000 for startups which are in the green field, and we every year, and this is in a regional level in Western Balkan 6 plus Greece. And we give $5,000 to ideas. So we help these businesses to grow and sustain a little bit until they get any further grants and money for their future work. Kosovo, from our experience, needs to do a little bit more because unfortunately, we don't have a lot of grantees from Kosovo who win these awards. The jury is international, and I'm pretty sure they're not biased. They score pretty well, but unfortunately we haven't seen a lot of tangible ideas or startups in the green field from Kosovo, and this is like a call from my side to perhaps try to bring more young people in this field to come and compete with the region and show that Kosovo can also do a lot in that regard and be a partner in the region of the Western Balkans with green ideas and sustainable ideas in the businesses. This has included circular economy projects with renewable energies, agriculture ideas which use sustainable energy to support the growth of, let's say, tomatoes, cucumbers, whatever, with solar panels, or bringing the water and to the soil and so on. So maybe not only those who are in the business world, but also the policymakers could steer up a more discussion with youth, so they can come up with great ideas and compete. Why not?
Thank you so much, Visar. And I think Bilerta.
I think I owe an answer to to Mentor, who has asked me in the Q&A section about the energy efficiency and what is being done, because he linked that question to my point of deforestation, and he says that, of course, deforestation is linked with households burning wood for heating purposes. So we know that energy efficiency fund has been created in Kosovo. Unfortunately, that tackles only the public sector, not the private one. So it is our duty and obligation to make the fund tackle the households as well, because that's where most of the electricity has been used for heating purposes. And of course, that's where we burn the wood for heating the spaces. We need a more robust plan for energy efficiency, which will, bring companies to isolate houses and work on insulation on the private sector. So we hope that the next government will be able to increase the amount of funding for the energy efficiency, because that's really a need, and that's what's lacking quite a lot. As I said, the public sector has been covered with the ongoing fund, but we do need more money to be addressed and directed towards the households or the private sector. because that's where most of the energy is being used. I mean, in ratio, I think it's around 70/30 right now. So we need to address the household sector with energy efficiency measures, the funds and money. I know we have a lot of donors on board, including European Union, World Bank, and so on, but we need to make that push towards the household sector.
Thank you so much, Bisat, also on picking up the question from the Q&A board. I'd also like to ask Blerta, I know you actually set up the Girls Coding Kosovo once upon a time, so a strong advocate for women and girls in STEM, but also more broadly on the whole kind of, I think you've done a lot of thinking about the future of jobs and digital transformation. You know, what is it that we should be doing and, you know, in creating jobs that are actually also promoting environmentally sustainable development in Kosovo?
Yes, that has been one of my very dear intervention, if I can say, also experience. I started working myself in the field of industry of technology. I realized that there is so much potential in one hand and also so much demand that can be offered from the young people of Kosovo, and unfortunately there was not a lot of, you know, profiles and ready to go skills from the youngsters. So that's what I got inspired, and the intervention with Girls Coding Kosovo was very successful because it was an untapped part of society. In you know, there was so many opportunities that were requiring such profiles, and my idea of this intervention was very practical, since this industry is very demanding. It isn't really tied to the university or system education, because it's very, and with the right trainings and tools, actually for even 1 year, a youngster can be, you know, ready to go for the market needs and start a beginner job in the industry. So within Open Data Kosovo, we have continuously worked also in this product development and increasing, you know, youngsters in such opportunities, because it's very important to get hands-on on practical projects and interventions. So like such workshops where gathering data and then analyzing those data that can have impact in their, you know, neighborhood, makes them more ready to understand such solutions, because we are today talking about very advanced maybe terms of measurements and everything, but when it comes to local data and data that they have access and actually experience, it's so much easier to understand and actually find solutions about them. So I would just like to say that there is a huge amount of opportunities, and we're still struggling. So we're still continuing to offer such opportunities for youngsters in Kosovo, so they don't leave for other countries, but stay here and work remotely for such opportunities.
Thank you so much, Blerta. And in the meanwhile, we also have a question in the Q&A box to Hannah. Sorry, I think I lost it now. Thanks. Just a second.
Oh, yes.
Anyone? Anissa, maybe you can read it, because my screen is looking a bit funny. Oh, Hannah, you can see it, the question yourself.
Yeah. How do you think we can create jobs in Kosovo that goes hand in hand with where the fashion industry and, for example, companies like H&M and Inditex want to or have to go in the coming years to be more sustainable? I will also wanted to relate to the question earlier. I think that there's a lot of potential for young girls or youngsters generally in Kosovo in terms of creating sustainable brands. And I've noticed that happening throughout the year, especially digitally through Instagram, which I was really impressed that all the youngsters sort of are understanding the meaning of sustainability. And I heard it was mentioned earlier in the report that teenagers specifically are really cautious about that. One of the methods that we can create businesses and promote sustainability is through secondhand shopping. And I've seen that happening and growing as an idea for business. I've seen many platforms, meaning shops that are promoting that. Another way of creating a sustainable business, which is really highly going on as a trend around the world, is making and mending and upcycling clothes. And I think this gives another way of creativity, because we've seen all the shapes, all the colors, everything. So if you just combine all the secondhand clothes, and you can make new creative garments. In terms of maybe be as an example as H&M, I would rather like to see independent labels happening in Kosovo than fast fashion labels, to be honest. H&M has had a crisis, such as all the other brands. I've been part of their program, and obviously they are looking for solutions of just basically replacing conventional cotton with organic cotton, and there's another level of expense and process in production, which I think we don't really need to aim that for now. I think that we have other really good sources and ideas that we can start from a small business, from an independent label that actually promotes the idea of slow fashion more than fast fashion.
Thank you so much, Hannah. We have a question to Peter, slightly on a different topic. You mentioned that it is important to crowd in private capital and blended finance as the solution to the problem. How do you attract private investment in green economy in Kosovo, where there are major economic challenges and competitiveness issues? Question mark.
Thanks, Mirjana. That's a good question. I mean, this is, my personal view is, and this is not a particular comment on any government, but governments, I mentioned a while back, I was in Azerbaijan at the beginning of last year, and I was hosting a meeting with about 500 individuals, all government officials. And I asked them to put their hands up, how many of them had ever run their own business? And only one person out of 500 legislators had ever run their own business. And I can tell you, having spent many years in the World Bank and others as well, you have to run your own business to understand how it works. And schools don't teach people about business education. An MBA gives you a little slice of it, but you see, you learn in a very, very different way. And I would say, normally what happens within an economy, if there are large state-owned enterprises and the state is a natural monopoly, and you want to, for example, look at the energy transition in Kosovo, and there's huge incentives, the EU Green Deal, all the vertical funds, large private corporations who are interested in coming in, sharing technology, doing mentorships and putting seed funding and angel investment on the ground. So I think the tumbling block for this is that, again, it's about this kind of political vision of where we want to be in 20 years and whether we're going to go through all of the pain to get there or not. I'll give you a really good example. We have a business, a joint venture out of Cleveland, Ohio in the United States. Our business partner is a company called Nottingham Spurk, a remarkable company. And they put $10 million of their own money into a joint venture nonprofit with the local university. And they opened up a facility of 60,000 square feet. And any young person in Cleveland, Ohio can walk into that facility, be given a free desk, a free computer, and free resources for as long as they want to experiment on their ideas. It's free. You know how much the annual costs of running that? It's $1 million. And you know how many people go through there? Now, for those young people who want to get into the business space, my personal feeling, I know having started business myself, no one's there to help you. That's what I generally think, right? So I think there's a lot that can be done. I think the dialogue needs to change. There are some wonderful examples that Kosovo can look at because there's enough incentives on a lot of the energy transitions themselves. But I think there's other ways to invest public monies to create space, actual space incentives, real capital, partnership schemes, mentorships, and all that. And that's a potential area. I don't think it costs money. I think it's a way of working, and I think it's about either deregulating or learning to regulate in a different way.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Sorry, technical issues. Exactly. I think that, you know, there's a great potential, and thank you for sharing that exciting example from Ohio. Definitely something very innovative. I think we have one more question where we promised to also provide an answer, and that was going back to hydropower actually, and back to Mimoza. The report and its focus is welcoming news for the NGOs working within sustainability sector, considering the current crisis and the challenges that current hydropower projects in Kosovo present. That has in fact gone against the business and human rights principles. How would you ensure that investments in this area promoting human rights, human development, and social inclusion? So again, going back to Mimoza.
Yes, thank you, Maria. I believe, as I stated at the beginning, there is necessity of a new legislation. With the current legislation, we have ambiguous explanation on what's allowed and what are the forms of that can be, the water can be used. And in particular with what we've seen recently, that what happened with hydropower plant, that it's definitely, I believe, I'm convinced, that it's a human right violation, it's a constitutional violation, because you cannot take, or we cannot use drinking water for energy production, as it's happening in several areas in Kosovo. So first change in legislation, and then immediate change in legislation, and then detailed revision of the permits that were issued or are in a process to be issued by the current or outgoing government. It's of crucial importance that, of course, in order to guarantee a safe and secure environment as well for investments, we have clear legislation and clear rules and procedures. However, by no means we cannot do that at the expense of our environment, the health of our citizens, and the basic needs and rights. So I believe that this is an emergent issue that the new government has to deal with, and also it's one piece of legislation that needs to be immediately prepared and also approved at the Parliament of Kosovo.
Thank you, Mimoza. Thank you so much. I think unless there's more questions coming in, or any of
Maria,
the panelists, yes?
If I can only add to, I didn't want to interrupt earlier when Visar was talking and related to the question about energy efficiency, and I think Peter briefly mentioned it as well. There is a huge potential with the EU Green Deal for Kosovo to actually put a priority that we need more investment, as the one it was done in municipality of Jakova with the district heating on biomass in other municipalities in Kosovo. Pristina has a good system of cogeneration, but I think in terms of further moving and discussing our projects on efficiency and what would be the request and project requirements for Kosovo towards the EU Green Deal, I think this is one major area that Kosovo needs to explore and has to, as Visar was mentioning earlier, because of the consumption of electricity goes quite at the extensive percentage to households in Kosovo.
Thank you so much. And in the meanwhile, and you bring up the green agenda for the Western Balkans, which obviously is a great opportunity for Kosovo and the whole of Western Balkans for in advancing the green transition and the green transformation more broadly. And that definitely there is a lot of opportunities there. And I think that is where, you know, when exploring the green recovery, where the focus should be. I know that there was also a question to the ambassador, Hernmarck, and you responded in writing. Maybe if we can go back to that question and just also ask you, Karin, to respond to it.
Thank you very much, Maria, and thank you everyone for a very, very interesting discussion today. I mean, we have touched upon many issues, including how to keep young people to stay in Kosovo and also how to build a greener future. And I think a lot of it is, of course, we do recognize that there are issues and there are, challenges ahead, but there are also opportunities. The question I got in the Q&A was what Kosovo could sort of learn from Sweden, despite not having the same economic resources. One very sort of practical thing that I think it might be useful, and we've talked about biomass and other issues here, but one very practical thing that I think it could be useful for Kosovo to look into is the whole idea and concept of waste to energy. This is, a country which has not really put in place yet a very sustainable waste management system. And one way of making your waste management system here in Kosovo more sustainable is to use it for energy. Waste can have a value, an energy value and an economic value. And by actually looking at it from that point of view, you can sort of have two flies in with one stone, or whatever it's called. By actually sort of taking care of incinerating waste and using the waste for in other ways. In Sweden, nowadays we have incineration plants for our waste, which provides both district heating and electricity, and also in biogas through more wet waste. We are producing biogas, and which fuels buses and taxis and everything. And just by doing that is a sort of practical way of discussing circular economy and taking care of the things we are producing, and also in terms of the waste we're producing. So that's just one example. I think Kosovo has an advantage in the fact that you're not a very big country. You're not a lot of people, which means that your investments, even if they seem large from a Kosovo perspective, are not necessarily large from a global perspective, but still can have an enormous impact. Just by sort of doing the things and making the green choices, you will have a huge impact from in a global perspective, fairly reasonable price or cost. So, and I think there are enough outside interest to assist you in this. If you would sort of put forward a progressive sort of green policy, and including in energy creation and things like that, I think you could actually create traction by being in the forefront, by saying, we're setting an example for this region. We're going to go first in line. We're going to put forward an ambitious plan. Then you might actually attract even more interest from investors and donors to assist you in this. So I think there is a lot of things to be done, and there is a lot of potential. And I think sometimes it's easy to be feeling a little bit sort of defeated by the fact that you are a small country and a small population, but this can also be turned into an advantage in terms of the kind of example you can set, because you can, from an outsider perspective, for a relatively small cost, you can show what can be done. So that is something I would really sort of look to for the future. And I think with the data that we will be provided now with the next Kosovo Human Development Report and other sort of activities here, I think we will have a better fundament to stand on. I think this has been an exceptionally interesting afternoon, and I thank everybody for taking part. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think that was a very nice wrap up as well. But I will also give very brief final remarks to all the panelists. And the question is, if you were given a chance to kind of bring forward one of the recommendations or one of the key messages from the report, what would be the thing that you would put as your priority moving forward in the next 1 year? We can start again with Mimoza.
Thank you, Maria. I actually came across the one that I loved and the one that I highlighted, and I'm planning it to use, hopefully to the ears and minds that would listen and be open in the near future in the new government. And it says, human development approach reminds us that economic growth is more means than end. And it definitely goes in line with what I was stating at the beginning of my address, that it's so important that as we are planning and making strategies that are all, I mean, it's a very interesting moment for Kosovo because most of the strategies are expiring or to be revised. So this is a great opportunity to link together economic growth, sustainability, and also have it as backbone environmental policies.
Thank you so much. Moving on to Blerta.
I would just like to say for the end, let's not disconnect from ourselves and from one another the problems and issues, but let's rather have an engaged citizenry with the tools and to affect change, especially for the groups that are most at risk of being left behind. These are essential forces for advancing this sustainable development.
Thank you. Thank you, Blerta. Over to Visar.
Yeah, sorry, I had to unmute. A just transition is important for Kosovo. We need to keep an eye on the balance that we create between the economic development and nature. One cannot go without the other one, so we really have to be careful because if we develop enormously without saving our resources and the health of citizens, then it's who are we developing the country for if we get sick people from pollution and environmental degradation. So we should keep citizen in core of our focus and develop strategies and policies around that. So that will be my take-out message.
Thank you very much, Visar. Moving on to Peter, your takeaway.
Well, it's kind of reading through the lines of the report, really. And I think it's incumbent for individuals to see themselves as being responsible. And there's been this tendency, I always remember this old phrase, and it kind of resonates the report. You know, if you're stuck in a traffic jam and somebody calls you up and they say, why are you late? You say, I'm stuck in traffic. Well, when are you going to realize that you are the traffic? The traffic jam is made of us, right? And really, really important here is not to figure that these are external problems because they won't be solved here. They're only going to be solved amongst individuals, and that will change everything here. So it gets to all of it. It's about responsibility.
Thank you so much, Peter. And Hannah.
Well, since this global initiative is about togetherness, I think that we should start from individual level to community level, national level and global level to make all the changes that are needed, and we should not be afraid. And from the creative perspective, I think there are many tools and channels that we can use to make things better.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Obviously, I have the task of summing up the discussion, which is a very challenging one, but I think that your final comments actually very nicely captured the essence of the discussion. I think it's all coming back to the human. It's all coming back to us as, as actors, as individuals, taking responsibility, doing whatever we can, using the means we have, working together. We've had a lot of discussion about circular economy. Obviously, I think there's great interest towards that, and there's a need for us to work together, figure out how to advance it. A lot of discussion about the need to improve data, bring data together, make it accessible, be have it as a basis for decision making. A lot of discussion about improving energy efficiency, promoting the use of renewable energy resources, using innovation, innovative approaches, and making sure that we prevent brain drain. Obviously, you know, young people are the future, and they are the ones who are actually the most concerned about environment, about climate, as we've heard. So there's a lot of work ahead of us, but I'm also sensing a very positive energy, willingness to do things. And definitely from our side, we're more than committed to forward in advancing this agenda. And I think that as we move forward with the Kosovo Human Development Report, that will also be an opportunity for us to engage together. And we will definitely be also reaching out to you on that regard. But again, thank you. Thank you to all the panelists for joining us today. Special thanks to Ambassador, to Karin for co-hosting, being with us. And thank you to all the participants. Many of you stayed until the very end. I know it was a long discussion, but very fascinating. So thank you, and wishing you a nice afternoon.